In Act 1, Scene 1 of Hamlet, Sentinels Bernardo and Francisco stand the night watch at Denmark's Elsinore Castle. Francisco is about to go off duty when another sentinel, Marcellus, appears with Horatio, a friend of the young Prince Hamlet. After Francisco leaves, Marcellus and Bernardo discuss a ghost they have been seeing on watch lately. The ghost, they say, looks a lot like the late King Hamlet, Prince Hamlet's father. But Horatio is skeptical. As they try to convince him what they saw was the ghost of King Hamlet, the ghost suddenly appears. The guards urge Horatio to try to speak with the ghost, but when he pleads with it to speak, it disappears. Horatio is terrified and suggests that the ghost presence might be a bad omen for Denmark. Noticing that the ghost was wearing the armor King Hamlet wore when he fought old Fortinbras of Norway, he recounts the story. In a battle over a small piece of land, old Fortinbras was killed by King Hamlet. Now, Fortinbras's son, also named Fortinbras, seeks to avenge his father's death and reclaim the land. As Horatio concludes his story, the ghost appears again and seems as though it were about to speak. Suddenly, however, the sun rises and the ghost slips away. Horatio suggests that they inform Hamlet of what they've seen. In the first scene of Act 1 of Shakespeare's Hamlet, he pulls the audience in with an intriguing ghost episode. Horatio's account gives readers a good amount of backstory in a relatively short scene. For instance, readers learn of the recent death of old King Hamlet. They learn of the tensions between Denmark and Norway and of Denmark's current state of unrest. This backstory will become the plot that unfolds over the course of Hamlet. Horatio goes from being skeptical to now fearing what the ghost foreshadows, especially for his good friend, Prince Hamlet. In this scene, Horatio also introduces the Fortinbras subplot, which will gain importance as Hamlet progresses. The information that Fortinbras has a desire to avenge his father's loss introduces a theme critical to understanding Hamlet's characters, namely the theme of thought versus action. In Hamlet, Fortinbras, described as a man of action, will serve as a foil to young Prince Hamlet. In Act 1, Scene 2 of Hamlet, King Claudius holds court and thanks everyone for their support through the recent death of his brother, King Hamlet, the marriage between him and Queen Gertrude, and his coronation. He proceeds to justify the swift marriage due to the war-hungry young Fortinbras, whom he suspects may try to attack the kingdom under the assumption that the Danes are in a weak position to defend themselves. Claudius assures the court that he has taken the proper action by writing to Fortinbras's uncle, the King of Norway, in order to persuade his nephew to leave Denmark alone. Laertes, the son of Claudius's counselor Polonius, asks if he can go back to France to school. Claudius agrees. After holding court, Claudius and Gertrude turn to a depressed Prince Hamlet and scold him for his excessive mourning. Claudius tells Hamlet to look at him as a father and hopes Hamlet will stay in Denmark instead of going back to school in Wittenberg. Gertrude echoes her new husband's words, and Hamlet agrees to stay. After Claudius and Gertrude leave, Prince Hamlet reveals his despair. Not only is he filled with sorrow over the death of his father, but he is also shocked and upset by the inappropriate wedding between his mother and uncle. He says if it were not against God's law, he would contemplate suicide. Hamlet's grief is then interrupted by the entrance of Horatio, Marcellus, and Bernardo. They tell him about the ghost they saw, and he excitedly asks questions. Hamlet decides to stand watch with them that night. As the men start to leave, Hamlet asks them not to tell anyone about this, and the three men give him their word. Shakespeare packs this scene with a lot of information through dialogue. The scene introduces many of the main characters of Hamlet. The audience is revealed Prince Hamlet's despair, the result of the death of his father, and the subsequent marriage between his uncle and mother. Claudius's treatment of Hamlet shows little to no affection. Gertrude's plea for Hamlet to stay in Denmark suggests she is genuinely worried about Hamlet. His obedience shows devotion to his mother. Nonetheless, in his soliloquy, he questions his mother's decision to marry so quickly. He feels betrayed and believes his mother to be disloyal. He ends his soliloquy saying that while his heart is breaking, he must hold his tongue, although his reason is not made clear. Act 1, Scene 3 of Hamlet begins before Laertes departs for France. He and his sister Ophelia talk about his trip, promising to write each other often. However, Laertes quickly steers the conversation to Ophelia and Hamlet's relationship. He tells her it's not a good idea to get too involved with Prince Hamlet, because a man of Hamlet's stature doesn't really get to choose his wife, so showing affection could get her reputation into trouble. While Ophelia promises to take his advice to heart, their father interrupts, surprised to see Laertes hasn't left yet. After Laertes leaves, Polonius reiterates what Laertes told Ophelia regarding Hamlet. Ophelia claims that Hamlet's expressions of love are sincere, but her father still says no. As the scene closes, Polonius forbids her to see Hamlet, and Ophelia submits. This scene acts to introduce and develop characters further, building the framework for the plot and to get to know Ophelia and Laertes. For instance, Laertes shows himself to be a caring brother. He comes off as polite and practical, and being well-traveled. Clearly, he knows the etiquette of the elite. Ophelia, for her part, shows herself to be young and inexperienced, but also earnest and without cunning. She is sincere in her love to Hamlet, but appears oblivious to the potential darker side of a young man's intentions. Nonetheless, the scene introduces their relationship, and the audience sees Hamlet through a new lens. Both Ophelia and Laertes seem thoughtful, which contrasts to what we see with their father, Polonius. Polonius seems self-absorbed and politically minded, even speaking in political fashion with his children. Scene 3 acts to provide more backstory and to move the plot along, as well as to expose more of the social customs and hierarchy of Denmark. In Act 1, Scene 4, Hamlet and Horatio accompany Marcellus on his watch. While waiting for the ghost, they hear much revelry from within the castle. Hamlet remarks that the new king is drinking and partying again. He talks for a while about how Claudius's behavior gives Denmark a poor reputation, taking away from its better qualities. Carrying the thought further, Hamlet talks about how one fault can overwhelm all the positive attributes someone has. Hamlet is then stunned by the ghost's appearance. It really does look like his late father. He begs the ghost to speak and tell him why he has come. In response, the ghost ominously beckons Hamlet to follow him, which Hamlet is eager to do. Horatio cautions Hamlet not to follow the ghost because it's probably dangerous. Horatio and Marcellus try to stop Hamlet, but he breaks free and follows the ghost. The two friends, in turn, follow Hamlet. This short, powerful scene at last confronts Hamlet with the ghost. Claudius's character is further tainted with his drunken celebrations. Not a great way to honor the memory of his dead brother. And this kind of behavior makes Denmark look bad. Although Claudius is not the first ruler to indulge in such revelry, Hamlet seems to think it's pretty excessive given the circumstances. The scenes shift sharply with the appearance of the ghost. A stark contrast is set between Hamlet's distant and negative view of his uncle and his devotion to his father, literally following him even in death. Shakespeare uses this tension-filled moment to introduce a few important ideas. First, the depth of Hamlet's sadness. I do not set my life at a pin's fee. Hamlet thinks his life has no value. Second, the theme of madness. Horatio warns Hamlet that if he follows the ghost, he could go mad. Madness, whether real or pretended, plays a central role. Much of what transpired with Hamlet and the ghost takes place out of sight and earshot. In Act 1, Scene 5 of Hamlet, he follows the ghost, who tells Hamlet he must avenge his murder. The ghost explains that the citizens of Denmark believe that the king died after being bitten by a snake while napping in his orchard. In reality, it was Claudius who killed him, pouring poison into the king's ear while he was napping, thus stealing his life, his crown, and his wife. As the ghost reiterates the demand to take revenge on Claudius, it also tells Hamlet not to harm his mother, Queen Gertrude. Hamlet, overwhelmed, delivers a soliloquy that is both sorrowful and raging, closing with a commitment to avenge his father's death. Horatio and Marcellus finally find him and want to hear what the ghost said. He responds to their questions by talking in circles and finally tells them about his duty. He swears them to secrecy and adds that they must hold to their promise no matter how strangely he acts in the future. He's going to pretend to act crazy. 3 times before they can swear, the ghost cries out, "Swear!" Horatio and Marcellus promise, and the 3 men leave. Each scene with the ghost of King Hamlet adds tremendous complexity to the plot. Now that the ghost is present and speaking, he reveals actions and motivations the audience would otherwise not know, like his own death. For Hamlet, he is a catalyst, capable of turning the course of the play's action. He is also a pivotal element when considering themes such as madness or revenge. His order to Hamlet to avenge his death builds tension. The information he conveys takes the play from a simple drama to a story of revenge. Even at this point, Hamlet's life parallels Fortinbras's. They are both princes, both with dead king fathers, both with uncle tutors, and both exact revenge. Additionally, the ghost's appearance moves Hamlet from being a grieving son to an aggrieved one. Although still sorrowful, Hamlet is now also full of rage.